ask you to lead off. I'm going to ask you for a perspective on the work around sweet potato that CIP's been involved in from your perspective. So, Jack.
Everybody ready? Yeah. Sweet potato I hope you notice on the new CIP logo that sweet potato is now in the left hand. The old logo was only potato. So I think that just says the story right there. I'm going to give you a little personal history because I think one of the things about great institutions is they bring in young blood, young scientists, and I think one of the role of young scientists is to question conventional wisdom. And I first came to CIP, the first time I was at CIP, I was a postdoctoral candidate. And I remember I had minored in nutrition. I'm an agricultural economist. And I minored in nutrition for my doctoral studies. And I went to my boss at that time and I said, you know, I've seen it here in sub-Saharan Africa, in some of the varieties that my colleague Ted Carey was out there testing. You've got some orange ones. And the big book at that time, 1992, from Jennifer Wolfe, said, Africans and Asians won't eat orange flesh sweet potato. They don't like it. And so therefore, you know, when I talked to my African research colleagues, they said, oh no, you know, we just throw those out in our breeding program. Because, you know, here in Africa we eat white and yellow-fleshed. And then you look at the statistics, and the vitamin A deficiency rates in sub-Saharan Africa are extremely high. So to me, it was a no-brainer. So we were able to go out and raise some money from the International Center for Research on Women in 1995. And we said, let's go ahead and look at this more in depth. And we found that people actually loved the color. The problem was the dry matter. The dry matter was lower than what African adult consumers liked. But we found that the young children loved the low dry matter. And so we had a real conflict here because who decides what to plant? It's the adults. So in our breeding program, that meant we had to start breeding for higher dry matter orange flesh sweet potato. And to the director's credit, he says, okay, go ahead and do this research. And it turned out to be revolutionary, I think, in the way forward in terms of what I see as CIP's major contribution to the continent of sub-Saharan Africa. It's saying, let's start not ignoring the crop of rural women. If you look at what African governments are investing in sweet potato, at the time we started, it was practically nil. In as of 2005, there were only 2 countries breeding improved varieties of sweet potato. And we've learned to get good results. You have to have adapted varieties that your consumers like. Now we have 12 African countries breeding sweet potatoes, including Ethiopia. And we have a lot of commitment. There are now 25 African sweet potato breeders on the continent. So my message is, in terms of development, question conventional wisdom. Don't let your bosses tell you, that no, you can't do this, it's been tried and it's failed. Find out why it failed, and then investigate. Because if we have a major public health problem, and we have a potential solution to that problem, let us use that technology to help us make a difference. And to make it work, we had to build the evidence base and convince the nutrition community. And many here of you in the room have been involved in the evidence-based research to make this happen. We had to combine the introduction of orange flesh sweet potato with appropriate nutrition education. And we know that changing behavior in child feeding practices is not easy. But I think we've come up, and together with our colleagues in many national programs, many NGOs, and with our collaborator Harvest Plus, we have been able to establish the evidence base that when we introduce orange flesh sweet potato, with an effective demand creation program and working on changing behaviors in child feeding practices, we can actually contribute to the reduction in the prevalence of vitamin A deficiency. So now, let's focus on going to scale. Let's focus on taking these models we've tested and proved out to scale, because we still have a lot to do. And I am honored to be awarded the World Food Prize, but it may have come too soon, because I fear when you get a prize then people think the job is done, and the job is not done. So please, join with us. We appreciate the support of the government of Ethiopia and other governments, but we can make a difference, and we're here to help work with all of you in partnership to make that difference. Thank you very much.
So thanks very much, Jan, for that very lively update on the kind of the history of sweet potato. I've got a personal anecdote there, because I've known Jan, I think, as a colleague for about 18 years. I can remember 18 years ago, Jan was talking about this orange flesh sweet potato, and I was thinking, that's a pretty crazy idea. But I have to say, being completely proven wrong, and I think the world's been proven wrong, and now we see huge prospects, and not only the World Food Prize, but there's a very systematic collection of evidence that shows this can be done. So that's a huge lesson and a learning for sweet potato, but actually for potato, and for work on food-based approaches more generally. So everybody's currently in CIP and in RTB, we're all basking in the collective glory of this fantastic achievement of the team. Has anybody else got an anecdote or something to contribute on the sweet potato story? Anybody wants to chip in? Okay, I think we'll move on. So we'll move on now to the potato story. And we're asking Ian Barker if he can give kind of a personal dimension, a little bit of the work of potato and how you've seen it from your perspective. And we do remember you have been a very, what's the word, very productive CIP colleague before you moved on to other things. So Ian.
Thank you, Graham. And could I also add my personal congratulations to Jan and the CIP team and Harvest Plus and from the Syngenta Foundation for an award. Very well deserved.
Thank you.
Anyway, so you're asking me to talk about the history. I think it was the history of. Can I call it Irish potato to avoid any confusion?
Sure.
So I'm not sure I'm the right person to give you a history lesson on CIP in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm sure my colleague Berger Lamag will give you a much better and much more rounded look at that particular subject. I think, what did I do? I served for 4.5 years. I'm very proud to do that. I never got my 5-year pin, Barbara. Huge regret. But,
I'll bring one next time.
I'd wear it with pride. Anyway, I think one of the problems when you talk about 45-year histories, you talk about that is, often people say, well, I think we say in the Syngenta Foundation we worked in Mali for 30 years. I think if you make that statement, you then have to say, well, what did you do? What did you achieve? So rather than give you a history lesson, I think the history actually of CIP in sub-Saharan Africa on Irish potato is really, of course, the history in the East African highlands. And it's really the legacy of that work is actually, what CIP has achieved with its national program partners. And you look at the statistics, and it really is quite remarkable. I think the statistics show that something like, 60%, I forget exactly, 380,000 hectares of the 600,000 hectares in the East African highlands are planted today with modern varieties derived from CIP crosses working in partnership with the national programs. And that's actually quite remarkable. I can't think of many stories out there like that. I can think of pearl millet in India. I can think maybe of Nerica rice in West Africa. But it's really up there as probably the most impressive adoption story, probably in the world, and as a contribution from the CG system. It really is quite something. So the history of CIP, I guess, is this legacy, this continuous introduction with its national program partners of new varieties, late blight resistant, short day adapted, market preferred varieties, that goes back to the 70s. And you see this continuous introduction of new varieties. For the presentation I give later in the week in the APA conference, I was looking at the data from the, I'm now involved with the Syngenta Foundation in more informal seed systems with Irish potato, and I'm interested in private sector investment into the delivery of public bred material, is what I'm actually interested in. The private delivery of public goods, that's what I'm interested in. And I was looking at the data of the varieties that our private sector partners are actually producing and selling commercially in Tanzania and Kenya alone, and it's 90% CIP national program varieties. It's quite remarkable. It really is a success story. So the history of CIP really is this legacy in sub-Saharan East Africa, is that of moving varieties. We're involved in that area. I think I remember that Jan gave me, perhaps my mentor, can I say that? In sub-Saharan Africa. And I remember she gave me 2 pieces of advice. One was always, of course, that you're here as a guest, you're working with your national program partners. So I followed that advice, thankfully, Jan. So when I visit my Minister of Agriculture in Senegal, I take my national program partner with me. The second piece of advice she gave me, which I completely ignored, she said, don't get involved in the business. But we did. Irish potato is a commercial crop, and I remember fondly, or Berger remember this, Berger, I should give, due thanks to Berger for supporting the work we did on introduction of private sector in Kenya. And I remember with my colleague Dina Boris, I remember we were trying to kickstart the whole thing moving, and at one point I remember having 20 tons, $20,000 of Irish potato seed in my own personal garage in Loretto as a neighbour of Jan. And we had the national programme truck reversing into my garden. And we had an ex-colleague of Berger taking orders from the DAOs of the Extension Service. And I think also, of course, the history of CIP is the history of its people. An Irish potato attracts some very passionate people, as does sweet potato. Being some fairly crazy people, but you see the people keep coming back. And I think really it's also a history of the values of the staff and the value of the organisation. I remember being trained, CIP is there to support its national programme partners. It's not there to compete with them. CIP doesn't build a laboratory, it works with its partners. So that's a bit of stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian, with those. Thanks very much for underlying CIP's remarkable achievements in potato as well as sweet potatoes. So that's, didn't yet get the World Food Prize, but I'm sure that'll be coming. And so I wonder whether the panel have any other comments around the potato story. Anybody wants to add an anecdote, a perspective? Okay, I think we'll move on then to Berger. I'm sure there'll be time for more interaction perhaps at the end. So Berger, we invite you to provide a perspective on, you've also had multiple roles, been very much involved in some of the kind of partnership networks. So we're asking you to give a perspective on CIP and partnerships in Africa.
Thank you. I wish I had 30 minutes or 20 minutes to talk about this because it's a very broad subject. But if I start with a very direct but important question, like why is effective partnership important? I think I would just say effective partnership is important because we can deliver on time and efficiently if we have effective partnership, and also we can make impact. That is, I think, what we can say of the day. So, being cognizant of this fact, CIP started forging effective partnerships right from the beginning. In the 1980s, the partnership CIP had in Sub-Saharan Africa was with the NARS to test actually CIP developed technologies in the different countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, especially varieties, as Barbara said earlier, varieties, try them in different agroecologies to develop varieties that will work in those agroecologies in Sub-Saharan African countries. At that time, the partnership was very limited to NARS and actually only research centers. But partnership is evolving, it's dynamic, it's organic. So as varieties started being developed and disseminated, so many demands came from farmers, from consumers, from the market, and from different areas. So partnership grew from only NARS to extension in the midst of agriculture of different countries. It also, as time went on, it developed into the private sector because of the products, as the minister said it earlier. The products, I just want to mention some of the products that contributed to advancing partnership, like crisps and chips. We all like those. Although people tell us don't eat them, they make you fat. Let me tell you something. Potato chips don't make you fat. That what makes you fat? What makes you fat when you eat chips or crisps is the oil in it. Potato is very safe. Cook it, eat it, it's very good.
So boiled potato for you.
Potato, don't worry. So, deep industries in Kenya, that produces chips and crisps and exports to UK came into the picture as a private sector. So the partnership extended to private sector. And another product that prompted bringing partnership to the private sector to the partnership was seed, as it has been said by everybody who said. Seed is very important to get high yield and also to have a valuable system. Seed is very important. So the question was, how do we get clean seed? So we came up with the answer of like producing mini tubers and high quality origination seed, and also producing planting materials of sweet potatoes that are high quality. But how do we do it? We cannot do it alone. Public organizations could not do it alone. So the idea was to bring in private sector, like Kisima Farm in Kenya. I thought you would mention that.
And Kibet is in the audience. We have someone from...
Okay, so Kisima Farm came to the picture in Kenya, producing meat tubers, high quality early generation seed, selling to farmers. When it comes to sweet potatoes, just I'm giving you some examples. When it comes to sweet potatoes in Ethiopia, we have several commercial farmers, and one of the largest ones is called Jara. And Jara Commercial Farm, persons that did not know sweet potatoes at all, came to the business because of the lucrative nature of the business. He produces clean planting materials, potatoes, and sells millions of those every year. So partnership is influenced by products. Products increase the partnership along the value chain. So, and also as biofortification came into the picture, oil-free potatoes became part of what CIPs is doing. The partnership extended now beyond agriculture to include health, Ministry of Health. And this went into schools, as was said earlier. It brought in the Ministry of Education into the picture. So it grew like that, and people started demanding high quality oil-free potatoes with high dry matter. Unfortunately, we have achieved this in countries like Uganda and Kenya, but in Ethiopia, unfortunately, we have still soft ones. But very soon, with winning the World Food Prize, I expect tomorrow, not 2 years after tomorrow, to get those varieties into Ethiopia and release them. So products increased the partnership, enhanced it, and made it more general along the value chain. Value chain is important to be effective. And the other area has been CIP for a very strategic partnership in 1994. Instead of partners with different countries, it partnered with SRO, sub-regional organization called Asareka in Sandit in the south. Instead of going country by country, just by having a partnership with Asareka, it was able to cover 10 countries. So the base of the pyramid was wider. Asareka came with its own finances, with all the resources, so increased to what has been done. And I must say that very good results and impacts were produced, made, but those impacts were in communities. We want to go out of communities, go to national level, because that's what will increase the priority of our crops in each countries. Another strategic partnership for it was SPHI. That is the program led by Jan, and this Sweet Potato for Profit and Health initiative started in 2009. Of course, some work being done in 2008. Different partners came with their resources, with their expertise, their experiences, contributed to this effect, and SPHI put a very high target of reaching 10 million African families by 2020. Putting your target high increases the partnership. That is very important. That's why partnerships are dynamic. So now SPHI has reached, today I heard 2.8 million, and in about the remaining 4 years, I think it will go beyond 10 million, I think. So that is, putting it high makes you bring in many partners in the value chain. But I'm not saying, don't quote me wrong, I'm not saying having many partners is always good, because that some difficulties and problems. So whenever we forge any partnership, we have to be very selective to select strategic partnership. That's what the SPHI did. And donor community is also asking now, we want value for the money. It's not only results here and there, or impulse here and there, we want impact at the national level. So this forced the city center to come in close, like CIPs, the CIPs. Today we're hearing about RTP, congratulations on that. But these RTPs are working, or city centers working in the same country, same community, but separately. That will not help us anymore. We have to come together, site integration. So this is also a kind of partnership that will result in national level partnership, national security impact. About working in Ethiopia for the last 4 years, I must say Ethiopia has one of the most robust exchange programs in Africa, Southern Africa. And you must be very proud of it, Mr. Minister. This is what I learned there. Countries are not important, are not interested in making impact here and there. They are very interested in national level impact. So for us to make more impact, we have to align our activities with the country interests. I think time is going, and I will stop here. I will answer questions if they come. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Berger, for those very insightful words. Maybe just a comment on the SPHI, that's the Sweet Potato for Profit and Health Initiative. Actually, 4 of us on the panel have been in the SPHI meeting. So what's really clear is that CIP, we're celebrating CIP, but really we're celebrating CIP and its partners. And CIP without its partners would have no achievements and no impact whatsoever. So as we want to jointly aspire to bigger outcomes and impacts, we need to find new ways of doing that, new styles of partnership. And I think the SPHI, which is co-chaired between CIP and FARA, is a new style of doing partnerships. And we're very much looking towards this more inclusive way of working together. So SPH has a very good model. I think we can learn from that from elsewhere and really take heart from the incredible results that are being achieved. So, does anybody else like to chip in on partnerships? Yeah, Ian, please. Some more wise words on partnerships before we hand it over to Andrew.
I do remember an anecdote.
Yeah.
Which Jan will remember as well. I remember in the planning phase of the Sasha project, I remember consulting, we were involved in consulting local partners, national partners, and I remember the representative from a large foundation based in Seattle. And I remember at the end of this meeting, this representative of this large foundation from Seattle-based foundation, asking the whole meeting, who should lead this project? Do you remember that? And actually said, questioning, if you like, why should CIP lead this project? And it was remarkable to me in that room, that no one dissented from that idea, and I think it's a testament, I think, to this model of partnership that CIP is trusted to add value. The value of the CGIR is this idea of adding value at the regional level or even the global level, and not competing, if you like, at a national level, international programs. I think it's a huge testament, I think, to the values of CIP, and it's taking partnership development seriously and respecting partners.
Thanks very much, Ian, for that helpful anecdote. So on those words, we're going to hand over to Andrew, who brings the partnership perspective from the other side of the table. So how has NRI seen CIP as a partner? So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Graham. When I was asked to say a few words this evening, I thought, well, where do I start? Where do I make it interesting? And so I thought, well, what makes a good partnership? Maybe that's the question we need to ask ourselves. So, what makes a good partnership? Passion. Yeah, we NRI and CIP were very passionate about, in my time, sweet potato and potato. I remember to Chatham, Gregory Scott burst into our life, and Greg shared with us the post-harvest and marketing strategy of CIP.
Burst is the right word, huh?
That was the word. But the passion just kept on coming, and I thought, there was me, in silly shorts at that time, and I thought, gosh, this is just amazing, there's all this stuff going on, I wonder how we can get involved in it. Of course, NRI TPI before it, had these long-term relationships going on with CIP. But a part of that attraction for me is why partner with CIP? And for us, it's the complementary skill sets. Okay, we do things that you don't do, and you do a lot of things that we don't do, so hence, it's good to work together. But above that, I think it relates to what Berger was saying, is the mechanism by which CIP works. This whole partnership model and the capacity strengthening of partners. Without that, CIP won't achieve what it will achieve. I don't think the national programs and universities would achieve what they achieve without that partnership. So, and for us, that's very much how we work as well. We're not in it to duplicate what you guys do. We're in it to partner with you to help you to do it better. And one of my first early recollections of this was actually when we were partnering with CIP to look at shelf life for sweet potatoes. And I sat in a meeting in Tanzania looking at the breeding plans for the year for Tanzania. This was probably early 90s. Ted Carey was involved in this work, who was here tonight. And we sat down, and their national programme budget for the year was $7,000. And looked at the resources that we were bringing in with this one project. So you look at it and think, all right, so how can we do this together to do it better, to move it all further forward? My second part is, if you're going to have a partnership that works, you need to share values. And as far as I'm concerned, we share very similar values with CIP in that we want to make a difference in the world. People don't work at NRI because they want to be part of a university. They want to work, I shouldn't say that, my Vice Chancellor's listening. But they want to work at NRI because they want to make a difference. And that's what I see from the passion of CIP staff in terms of making a difference in the world. But also, I think CIP staff, like my staff, are very willing to adapt what they're doing so they can do it better. And I think that makes a real difference. Also, the willingness to take risks and adopt new approaches. So I wrote that down before Jan was going to talk about it. I didn't know what Jan was going to say about taking risks with orange flesh sweet potato, but that fits. But also the ability to learn within that, to learn and share those lessons that we've learned over time. I think we also share values in terms of doing high quality work. Work that we can publish internationally, work that will be recognised in the future. My third point was around commitment. One night stands may be fun for that night, but what does it bring in the future? The long-term commitment, and I think CIP and NRI and CIP with its partners in Africa have shown that long-term commitment and long-term vision. And for us it's been around seed systems, pests and diseases, post-harvest and marketing issues. And along with that, I think come issues of trust and responsibility. And I think if you have those in a relationship, then your relationships are going to last a long time. So just to end what I was saying, I sort of reflected on some of the things that had happened over time. So my big break in life as a young scientist at NRI, when we were still part of ODA, which is now DFID, was that I was given management of the post-harvest research programme. And one of my early things I funded was actually Vital Hagamania's work, post-harvest scientist, I think CIP's first post-harvest scientist based in East Africa.
A shared position.
Yeah, it was a shared position. And suddenly I had to commit to spending this money, young scientists commit. And I had Gregory Scott on the phone. He said, Andrew, you've got to commit to this. I've got Hubert Zanster on the phone, talk to him. And there was me, sitting in my shorts thinking, oh, he sounds important. So that was one of my first recollections. And then Jan was, when I early worked with Jan, I was working with Andy Hall, and actually when I congratulated Jan on winning the World Food Prize, she sent me a very early picture of herself and Andy Hall, sat around a table late at night, computer open, writing up some marketing study they'd been doing on sweet potato bread, I think it was. I've already mentioned the work with Ted Carey and Peter Muir on shelf life, important work for us. Perhaps a very defining moment for this whole sweet potato work was actually the Reaching End Users project funded by Harvest Plus. And we were very pleased to partner with CIP as part of that initiative. And certainly in the UK, from the UK government's perspective in terms of investment in this area, the results of that study convinced them that this is where they're going to put some big money. And I think that's been helpful to Harvest Plus and to CIP an RTB program in years to come. Our relationship's grown as part of the RTB program, and we certainly appreciated the relationship with and leadership from Graham within that, and the support of CIP to Graham in doing that work. A highlight for me, two more things. One highlight for me was 2009, where we had the ISTRC meeting, the International Society of Group Crops meeting in Lima, Peru, when I was president of ISTRC, I think about my ninth year or something like that. But CIP were just so helpful, so accommodating, so keen to get a good quality product out there. And I think it did a lot for ISTRC, and hopefully I did a lot for CIP in terms of promoting the products that went with it. But the collaborations continue as part of the RTB program. So, for example, we currently have one of our staff members, Diego Naziri, seconded to CIP, and I'm sure we'll do lots of other things together in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. It's great, I think, to get the perspective from the other side of the partnership. Sometimes we look at it from our side, but it's great to hear the other side of the story. And I think you drew out some of the really kind of essential elements of great partnerships, that there has to be a shared vision, but yet complementarity. There's got to be trust. And I think also partnership and partnering, there's a skill set there. So it doesn't happen automatically. It's something that learned, and you need to reflect upon partnerships. So that's also great to have that feedback and feeding into our own reflection on how we manage partnerships. And it's really well taken there, your positive appreciation for CIP's efforts in partnering. And we certainly appreciate from your side the NRI skills in partnering with us. So I think it's been a great mutual partnership. So that's one example of a very healthy partnership that we have. And if anybody else on the partnership topic would like to chip in? If not, we're gonna change, move on from the partnership story. We had some great from Berger and Andrew there. We're going to move now thinking about regional priorities and how do potato and sweet potato fit into regional priorities. And I think again it has a partnership dimension. How do we work together with both the regions and national governments to do things that make sense mutually? So on to the topic of regional priority. We hand over to you, Nelson.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, may I also just chip in a little bit on the partnership issue. I think the passion that Jan and colleagues have demonstrated around orange and sweet, potato and sweet potato, is creating avenues for partnerships that, both within the CG and outside, that perhaps would have been possible traditionally. And this is, I think, a very important lesson that I think we need to, build on looking forward. Because I remember, being from FARA, FARA is really a regional organization that was formed to support African partners, primarily. That is the sub-regional organizations and then the national partners. And we've been trying to find, concrete ways of collaborating with the CG, for example. Over the last few years, we've been having so-called productivity workshops. Basically, we try to structure a way in which FARA could, meaningfully collaborate with the CG. And I can see around the potato issue, we are finally landing onto something that is very specific. So I just wanted to note that. But, how we fit the potato and sweet potato into the regional, strategies. Various countries have priorities in their own countries, depending on their developmental goals in the agricultural sector. But I would just like to highlight, some key drivers that I think cuts across the board that, kind of dictate the kind of, agricultural policies that countries adopt, and also regional organizations like FAR. For example, in Africa, we have some very, crucial demographic change. Africa, I think, is the continent with the highest fertility rate. We have population growth is very fast, and it is urbanizing very fast, and it is very youthful. And if you consider, for example, even in medieval Europe, urbanization and consumption of potato was kind of associated. I think there's a historical record of that fact. In the sense that, potato and sweet potato, they are able to deliver, high energy in terms of, yield of energy per unit area of land, I think potato and sweet potato are very superior. And I think the nutritional composition of potato and sweet potato perhaps are much better than the traditional cereals that constitute the basic staples in many African countries. So I think even as we look for ways in which we can feed, increasingly urbanizing African population, I think we do well to focus on the potato and sweet potato. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then you also have the other driver is climate change, and I think we've heard about this, which is very, very important in Africa right now. The whole of Eastern and Southern Africa, most of last year, suffered very serious drought. And these are, putting lots of constraints, both biotic and abiotic, on traditional crops. And sweet potato and potato being very adaptable to various agroecological zones, I think is a potential climate smart crop. And I think looking forward into the emerging regional policies as well as national policies to address issues of climate change, I think we do well to focus on potato and sweet potato. The other aspect that I wanted to consider is environmental degradation, which is a very important driver also in Africa's agriculture. We've been talking about the Green Revolution, and it did very well. And we'd like to bring it home to Africa. But we know the externalities that are associated with traditional Green Revolution. And Africa is, of course, challenged to produce food for this burgeoning population. But how do we do it without necessarily degrading our environment? We are looking for new paradigms to do this. So people are talking of sustainable intensification, for example. And I think crops like sweet potato, they lend themselves very well to this because sweet potato, for example, is a cover crop, and if you're talking of integrated soil fertility management, I think sweet potato lends itself into this. And then also, we have majority of our people still living in the rural areas, and much of that labor is kind of trapped in the agricultural, in the farm. And how do we move that labor outside into non-farm employment? I believe by developing value chains like potato, creating, for example, small-scale, rural-based agro-processing facilities that can be able to employ people in the rural areas, will be able to help us have some kind of positive structural transformation. That is really the path to follow in economic development. But I would now want to focus on the major, regional policy that I think are trying to embrace, sweet potato and potato. First of all, of course, all of us know about the CADEP framework, which has been in since 2003, and in 2014, African leaders recommitted to the CADEP process through the Malabo Declaration. And now we are talking of the post-Malabo CADEP strategy. And in that strategy, we are talking of every country prioritizing certain key value chains to focus on. Because now, as they say within the CADEP fraternity, we are moving on to implementation. So each and every country will be expected to prioritize a given number of value chains to focus on. And I believe as a group, we can be able to influence potato and sweet potato for all these advantages that it has to be embedded in the national agricultural investment plans of CADEP implementing countries. And then also, we have a new leadership in the African Development Bank, and lots of things are coming up, and we are seeing very good, changes coming up in the agricultural sector because of the current leadership of the African Development Bank. And they have a strategy that is called Feed Africa strategy, and one of the elements in which this strategy is going to be implemented is called Technologies for Africa's Agricultural Transformation. We are talking of over 24 agricultural value chains. And these ones, they are basically packaging CG developed technologies in those value chains. And they are going to be outscaled massively in over 23 countries. And the budget for this program is a whopping $800 million US. So this is a kind of a frontier that we are encroaching now. And I think potato and sweet potato will be very critical in this regard. Indeed, I believe under the program intervention area on horticultural crops, we have potato and sweet potato very prominently, positioned there. And then we also have another program that is emerging called Africa Agricultural Research Program. This is going to be led by FARA. Right now, the reason why my executive director was not able to come is that is currently hosting a key meeting in regard to this program. This is also another very key, initiative that is going to, shake Africa agriculture, if I may say. And I believe potato and sweet potato will be very, very prominently embedded in this one, because the Africa Agricultural Research Program is basically support the TAT in that to ensure a constant supply of demand-led technologies of the TAT. And I believe sweet potato and potato will be very, very centrally considered in this. And then lastly, FARA came forth under the Sustaining the Cadre Momentum, what we call the SANS Agenda for Agriculture in Africa. Basically trying to outline how science can better help development of Africa's agriculture. And in that we have cutting-edge technologies like biotechnology and biofortification being very prominently highlighted in that agenda. And of course, we all know that the biofortification story sits very squarely with potato and sweet potato. So I just wanted to, float this, and maybe I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Nelson, for kind of running through the different initiatives and the importance of regional strategies and priority setting. Perhaps just a few words on that. I think it's very important that sometimes in policy arenas, our crops haven't got the importance that they sometimes deserved. So I think we need to be very respectful of both national and regional priorities, but also we need to bring evidence to the table to show that sometimes investment priorities needs to be shifted. So we need to be respectful, but also engage with those priorities so that we can really show that our crops merit this investment that sometimes they haven't got. So I think incredibly useful that we're engaged with FARA in such a productive way, and we need to continue that dialogue. It's not just about doing the great research. We need to be very engaged and help inform policymakers from a science perspective with information about what truly makes a difference. So that was very insightful, your words there. Anybody else from the panel would like to make any other contribution?
Yes, to continue from where you stopped. Priorities have been set based on the current area coverage and all those things in many countries, and horticultural crops, like roots and tubers, did not have that opportunity to cover large areas. So they are always undermined. But as population is growing, and land size per family is diminishing very rapidly, we have to resort to, I think, crops that give high yield in a given area, variety area, and potatoes are the crops. And not only that, you said yourself that the nutritional quality of even potatoes, the non-biofortified potatoes, and the sweet potatoes, biofortified, are much better than that of cereals. So governments do not see this and give that due priority to these crops. I think it's time, because times are changing, climate change is coming, and our crops are resilient, and they give high yield in just 3 to 4 months. So I think taking this into consideration will shift the priority setting and the funding possibilities, to our crops, I think.
Andrew, yes, please.
I think what we shouldn't forget, of course, is that Jan's just up to the World Food Prize. And that is a wonderful opportunity to raise the profile of sweet potato and potato within the wider context. So no pressure, John. But no pressure, that one thing. But actually, I think the visibility of what's happening is increasing. And I give you a flippant example, but an interesting one. In that my colleague Ben Bennett drives an Audi, and he's very proud of his new Audi. So every good Joe, yes. But every 3 months, he receives his Audi magazine, and in the front of the Audi magazine was 10 best new technologies. So he's going through the technology, fancy bits of engineering or whatever else. I think the third one was orange flesh sweet potato.
send us the clipping and the reference. to
Yeah,
that.
that's no problem.
So I think, Berger, that was very good words there to sort of draw down on what are some of the real advantages of our crops. Perhaps another one to stress would be income earning potential.
Yeah.
If you look at the growth rates of potato and sweet potato across all major crops in Africa, they have the highest growth rates. And I'm sure that's got a lot to do with the income earning potential as well as all the nutritional and food security benefits. So let's not forget the income earning potential as well, and amongst all those other potential. Nelson, would you like to have a final word on this before we close?
Specifically on the...
No, I mean we can stop now actually, if you've got any other final words. We'll come into the closing comments I think before we wrap up the panel.
No, I think the kind of passion, like I say, that German colleagues have generated around it is contagious, and you just like to propagate it, you know. And
I'm going viral.
I would like to, you know, talking of partnerships in a structured and strategic way, in order to reach out, you know, partnering at various scales in order to accelerate scaling up, you know. And I think that is one of the key roles of supranational organizations like FAN. You remember when you stated when you partnered with Acerca and you could see the multiplier effect around the countries in Eastern Africa. So I think that is something that is very critical. How we partner in order to accelerate, you know, scaling up. Yeah.
So thanks very much. I think on that note, on the contagion of passion, we've had a very passionate panel, and we hope you've become also infected with our passion. I know many of you already are. So on that note of passion, I think we're going to close out. I'd like to thank the audience for being patient with us. I know you haven't had seats. And I'd like to thank the fantastic panel for a very dynamic and interactive panel session here. So a big round of applause for everybody. So I think we now depart the scene and we hand the mic back to our masterful master of ceremonies here, Ariel. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we give a big clap to the chairperson and the